we are not going to open the straits with the United States Marine Corps, the 82nd Airborne, or the Tier 1 operators that everyone on cable news seems to know so much about. The Tier 1 operators, Tier 1. Anyone who's paying any attention that if you work in the White House or in the U.S. military, now is time to say no, absolutely not, and say it directly to the president, no.
Dave, the deal sounds very much like surrender on our part, which I'm in favor of. The Iranians proved to be tough MFers. And they realized that they had something far more powerful than a nuclear bomb. They had control over the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump was warned prior to getting involved in this conflict.
Once again, President Donald J. Trump proved all of his critics wrong, because ever since the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, a lot of critics came out and said this was a defeat for the president and for the United States, because one of the key agreements was for the Strait of Hormuz to be opened. But the Iranians, they refused to open up the strait by threatening ships that were going back and forth. But over the weekend, President Donald J. Trump, he made a bold strategic move to take control of the Strait of Hormuz by initiating a naval blockade. And now what we're seeing is that these critics, they're humiliated for not trusting the president to get this job done. Let us get into it by taking a look at this video explaining this move by President Trump. Play clip.
The U.S. Central Command says a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz goes into effect in 16 hours. Now, the blockade will involve stopping any ships that come out of Iranian ports or Iranian coastal areas. U.S. ships will not be stopping vessels traveling from non-Iranian ports. The early stages of demining the strait has begun, and information about a safe path through the strait will be communicated to commercial mariners. Now, Iran's Revolutionary Guard put out a defiant statement that the Strait of Hormuz is now under their control, and any warship approaching the strait will be seen as a breach of the ceasefire and will be dealt with strongly. President Trump told Maria Bartiromo details of the naval blockade.
We're putting on a complete blockade. We're not going to let Iran make money on selling oil to people that they like and not people that they don't like, or whatever it is. It's going to be all or none.
So we know that President Trump is a deal maker. That is what he does. He makes deals. And once he made that deal with Iran, that ceasefire deal to open up the strait, and Iran, they did not open up the strait, that is when a lot of people came out and criticized the president, because we know the Strait of Hormuz is basically this passage in the Middle East where over 25% of the world's oil, it flows through. But when President Trump went ahead and made the announcement of the naval blockade, what we saw as a result is that we saw a majority of the world's tankers, the tankers that brings oil all over the world to all these different countries, they started coming to the United States up to the Gulf of America to buy oil from America, which is a huge win, not just for President Trump, but for the country as a whole. And here we have that truth post from President Trump explaining this, where he said, massive numbers of completely empty oil tankers, some of the largest anywhere in the world, are heading right now to the United States to load up with some of the best and sweetest oil and gas anywhere in the world. We have more oil than the next two largest oil economies combined, and higher quality. We are waiting for you. Quick turnaround, President Donald J. Trump. As you can see, this is a massive win for the country, for the United States of America, because what we have is that we have all these different countries all over the world. They're rushing to the United States to purchase oil and gas, which is a massive win. And remember that the president didn't necessarily wanted this, because what he wanted was for the strait to be opened and free. Right? Because remember, at first, the president asked all these different countries that depend on the strait to go and open up the strait themselves, and they refused. And he tried to make a deal with Iran, and Iran, they refused to open up the strait. And remember that the president even sent J.D. Vance to the Middle East to make a deal with the Iranians, and they refused. And here we have a video of J.D. Vance announcing that they were unable to reach a deal. Play clip.
We have been at it now for 21 hours. And we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement. And I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could. And they have chosen not to accept our terms.
That was J.D. Vance announcing how the negotiations went when he went to Pakistan to negotiate with the Iranians. And the Iranians, they overplayed their hands because the Strait of Hormuz was the only leverage that they had in this entire war. Because remember, our military, they destroyed Iran, their leadership, their military, and pretty much their defense manufacturing capabilities. So right now, with the president taking control of the Strait of Hormuz, they have nothing left to negotiate with. And here we have a reporting explaining how the Iranians, they overplayed their hand. Play clip.
We don't know many of the details out of the negotiations yesterday. It's all very fresh. But I can tell you that regional sources say the Iranians made a major mistake at the negotiating table. They believed that the United States would fold. And obviously, the Trump administration went in with very clear objectives, and the Iranians were unwilling to meet those objectives, namely their nuclear program and getting rid of that enriched uranium. This is a key component to build a nuclear bomb, and regional sources and sources in the U.S. have been very clear. If you allow Iran to keep the enriched uranium and the facilities that allow them to create enriched uranium, they will continue to try and create a nuclear bomb, and everything would go back to square one. And so that's exactly what the president is trying to avoid here. He gave the Iranians a chance at the negotiating table to make a good faith deal and get rid of that enriched uranium and to open the Strait of Hormuz as they are supposed to do as it relates to international law. And they've been unwilling to do both of those things. And that is why at this very moment, the region is once again on the brink of military conflict because Iran is unwilling to make a fair diplomatic deal.
And here we have another video explaining what this means for Iran, what this move means for Iran. Play clip.
I think the reverse blockade is probably the newsiest piece. And this is classic President Trump. He's completely reversed the paradigm. That's supposed to be Iran's leverage. He's like, not so fast. I'm going to do this to you so you can't get your oil out. It's their last economic lifeline. He's taking that away from them. And so that is, just as I said, a classic move. You take their advantage, you turn it into our advantage.
How significant is this news that we see hundreds of super tankers headed to the Gulf of America to try to buy oil and gas from the U.S. in Louisiana and Texas?
No, it's huge. This, again, is turning this to our advantage. This is going to be enormously profitable for us. And in 2025, under President Trump, we hit a record of oil and gas production. We're well on track to beat that this year and have even more nice, clean American oil and natural gas to sell to our partners and allies to fuel the future. And so the future is not Iran. It's going to be the United States here as one of the world's great energy exporters.
And that includes China. China will have to buy from the U.S.
Absolutely. And President Trump is going to roll into Beijing next month as really in an incredible position of strength after this 4-month period, the most consequential in modern American history between Venezuela and Iran and this energy production. So this has been.
So despite what critics been saying, what we're seeing is something completely different, because what we're seeing is that the country is winning. And I get it. You can be against the war. You can be against the war effort. But what we're seeing is that people, they're saying this deal, the ceasefire deal, was a defeat on the part of the president and on the part of the United States. And it should stay that way, which is ridiculous, because the thing is, you can be against the war. That is completely fine. So what we have to recognize is that we're in this war and we should get the job done, because you can't be rooting for us to pull out of the war and end the war how it is, because what that's going to be is going to be a strategic defeat for the United States. Because imagine if we leave this war in the state that it is, where Iran, they're somewhat still able to build a nuclear weapon and they're able to control the Strait of Hormuz, then what message does that send to Russia and China? Which is why we need to support the president and the military to get this job done. And because if the president succeeds, if the military succeeds, then the country will eventually win. And that is what we want. Because I can take you back to 2021 when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. A lot of people supported the withdrawal of our military from Afghanistan because we were in that country for far too long. We were spending too much money. But what I'm trying to say is that a majority of people supported that move. But what people did not support was how Biden withdrew from Afghanistan, because that was a complete blow to the credibility of the United States. And I think as a result, that is why Russia invaded Ukraine. And that brings us to the end of today's show. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.